Now, the state of creation. My definition of creation is when we forget about ourselves. When we're so involved with what we're thinking about, so involved with what we're doing, that the thought becomes the experience. And the side effect of true creation is you fall in love with what you're creating. You feel joy. You feel lifted. And you become so involved with what you're thinking about that time and space disappears. There is no thing. There is no body. There is no time. That's the natural state of being. And when we're able to remove the masks of the emotions that we've memorized, anger and fear and insecurity and worry and all those conditioned emotions that are limited emotions, as we begin to remove the masks of that personality self, and we begin to move into a state of creation, the side effect of creation is a movement of energy out of those glandular centers that are being turned on for survival. And when that happens, our heart opens. Energy moves into our chest, and we feel lifted, and we feel joyful, and we feel inspired. And the moment we feel that way, we become selfless. We become generous. We become giving. We become caring. We become compassionate. That's because when we begin to remove those emotions and we unmemorize them, that mind that's keeping your heart beating, that divine intelligence within you, begins to leak out. It begins to bleed through, and you begin to become like it, more like it. And so our purpose in life is not to please God or do the right thing or be perfect or look good. Our purpose in life is to express that intelligence through us, to express that mind through us. And we should look at the adversity in our life and the conditions in our life as an opportunity to see how we can use all that knowledge and philosophy, all that information we learned, how can we use that information to the circumstances and conditions in our life to navigate a greater end. Now, the brain wakes up for the first time, and it begins to reach outside of the familiar. The box of the brain, thinking in the box, there's no box in your brain. But the principle in neuroscience is that nerve cells that fire together wire together. So if you keep thinking the same thoughts and performing the same actions and feeling the same feelings for years on end, the repetition of that process over time causes gangs of neurons to hardwire into a finite pattern. We would say you're thinking in the box. And so someone says to you, Jesus Christ was married. And you say, I can't really reach that one. No, it doesn't feel right. To think outside the box is to force the brain to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, in new combinations. And the ingredient that allows us to do that is information. It's knowledge. Because as we begin to add new stitches to the fabric of our very personality self, as we begin to add new circuits and new connections, that new bit of information and that new circuitry becomes the raw materials to make the brain work in new ways. And whenever we make the brain work in different ways, we just made a new mind. Mind is the brain in action, or the brain at work. And if we can make the brain work differently, we've just changed your mind. And knowledge then allows us to perceive what has always existed, but we didn't have the circuitry to process it. For example, I was in Australia a little ways back, and I go to this art studio, and the coordinators take, you follow the coordinators, and so they take me to this really wonderful art studio. And, it's about the size of this room, and they have all this Aboriginal paintings on the wall. So, I walk around the room in 10 minutes. I look at all the paintings, and I'm like, I'm done. So there's a big, couch in the center, and I sit on the couch, and I kind of relax like this. And the owner of the art gallery comes over, and he's this Italian guy from Sicily, and we start talking, and his parents were from a town very close to where my father was from, and so we have this instant connection, and we start talking. And he says, do you know anything about Aboriginal art? I said, I know nothing about it. He said, the Aboriginals were pretty cool people. They had the ability to lift their consciousness above the horizon. And they could then begin to see where the water was, where the water holes were. And they could see the energy spots where they would sleep and set up camp. They could see the burial grounds of the ancients. They could see the ley lines, the cross lines of energy that led them to hunting and creatures and all of that stuff. And then when they were able to figure out all these markers, they would put a big barrier around it and protect it in consciousness. So then he walks me over to a painting that looked like a paramecium or some type of amoeba or something. And he starts telling me about, the stuff. And all of a sudden, I began to see what had always existed, but I didn't have the circuitry in place to perceive it. You see, reality is the same way. When you learn new knowledge, you begin to see what has always been there, but our brain edited it out. We didn't have the capacities to see it. So then, if you take, our thoughts are created from our memories. And if you take a set of thoughts and you string a set of thoughts together, a thought, a thought, a thought, a thought, that's called an attitude. So if you have a series of bad thoughts, you have a bad attitude, right? And that thought then is connected to a feeling, right? And that feeling then reaches a thought, and so we could say that thinking and feeling sets up a particular set of chemistry that we begin to have an attitude. And if we take attitudes and we take an attitude, an attitude, an attitude, an attitude, can chunk them together, you know what that's called? A belief. And if we take beliefs and we chunk our beliefs together, it forms what we call our perceptions. And our perceptions then influence every choice we make in our life. And so then to change our perceptions, we have to change the very fabric of our knowledge base. And so as we begin to change the circuitry, we begin to perceive what has always existed, but the brain didn't have the capacity to see it.